Africa is emerging as a dominant global player, and it's rethinking its education systems. I had the pleasure of talking to Professor Sam Mchombo, a pioneer in the study of African languages and lead linguist at the University of California, Berkeley. We discussed the role of African languages in these new education systems. Why is it that the formal system of education in Africa right now is devoid of African knowledge system and generally African culture?
The difference lies in the fact that formal schooling came with literacy requirements. And I think that's what made the major difference. African societies were primarily oral. So the knowledge representation was in the form of oral representation. The languages, of course, represented the knowledge systems, but the knowledge resided in the memories of the agents of knowledge production. So in effect, you transmitted the knowledge through the word of mouth. Now, what gave the formal schooling a different perspective was the fact that it came with the the medium of written language. And the advent of writing gave knowledge representation a different format. It now meant that you could preserve your knowledge in a form that was now independent of who had originated it, who the innovators were. And so when you have your knowledge represented in written form, independent now of the agents of knowledge production, that form is also transportable. It can be sent away. And not only that, you do not need the physical presence of the recipients. In other words, if I have to impart knowledge to my children, to my grandchildren, and it has to be in the oral mode of representation, they have to be there. I have to tell them in person. But for someone who is not physically there, it means either that knowledge is denied them, they'd have no access to it unless it's by other, by hearing from someone else. Whereas if it's written, and it's also written in a language they understand, it will be available for them, even in the absence of who may have been the original innovator. So the fact that the written versions were those of the values, cultures of the people who had come in. So the books that you had available effectively reflected European values, European systems of government, European history, etc. So in effect, the content was already tied to, the outside. Now, what about African languages? Observe that the example that you have given of the Bible is a unique one, because amongst the the institutions that came along was that of proselytization, converting people to the this religious outlook, Christianity. Of course, Islam comes along, and Islam also has the Quran. Now, the point is that the missionaries, their agenda wasn't simply that of, let's say, providing instruction in biology, providing instruction in civics. Their agenda was that of getting you to, embrace a particular religious outlook. And you had already a religious outlook in place, the traditional one. The fact that Mumbi, the Gikuyu came on from Mount Kenya, etc., and the rest of the beliefs you had with that about the origins of the people. It was already in place, so it got supplanted. Now, what made Christianity then gain the upper hand? Of course, two things. One, it was part of the colonialism, so it came with the people who had the power. But secondly, it was exactly what you mentioned, having the Bible. It was written. All right? So it was available, independent of who actually put it together. We all know what Jesus said because we have it available. I got a Bible right there, all right? I got the Quran right there, which someone, and I've got them, on the shelf there. Those things are available. So the question really, reduces to why haven't the government really embraced the idea of extending what has already been done in the domain of, let's say, religion, especially Christianity, to make the beliefs available in written form in the local languages and extend it to the other subjects, especially science. And that becomes an interesting one because there's this belief, by, unfortunately, a lot of Africans that their languages just, are not ideal for science education, and that English especially, and maybe the European languages in general, are the ones that are suited to it.
Yeah.
And yet there are no arguments that have been presented as to, to show that that is to be taken as a, the operative principle that's actually true. It's taken almost as axiomatic. In fact, if you take a look at, people like, the first president of Tanzania, Julius Nyerere, he translated, Shakespeare's plays, one or two plays, Julius Caesar for sure. All right. And whilst, of course, there's an intrinsic value to that, part of it was to demonstrate that Swahili had pretty much the range of vocabulary and structure to be able to handle, part of the, the best of English literary tradition. And yet somehow we still don't think of African languages as good enough for science. There was this young man, William Kankwamba, in Malawi, who actually dropped out of school because apparently he couldn't get the financial assistance from his family, etc., because he couldn't afford it. So he didn't really have the advantage of proficiency in English. All right. And, in the village, he started picking up these various things, etc., and started building a windmill, which generated electricity. How did he manage to get the technical expertise to do, to build something that seems, to require a lot of, goes with what may put down as science and technology without the advantage of the foreign language? In other words, it's not in principle impossible.
If you look at Africa right now, Kenya, we have 44 languages. Nigeria, we have over 50 languages. Tanzania is the same case. So how can we build a case for one language over another, considering the politics of the terrain on the ground and the diversity that exists?
Okay. The very countries you've mentioned also tend to have what you may call regional languages. Languages that have assumed a greater prominence, and which most people, as it were, use and subscribe to. So in Kenya, you have Swahili alongside English as official languages. All right. Nigeria, you mentioned, much as it has all these many languages, there's still the image that you're going to have, Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo as sort of the most visible languages, and most people are likely to be aligned with, those. You've got South Africa. South Africa has got the 11 official language policy. I was talking to a young lady from South Africa yesterday in this office, and she speaks Setswana, which is one of the languages. And yet the default is, if you make a trip to South Africa, people say, oh yeah, you better learn Zulu. There's a sense in which Zulu has, tends to gain a more of an image of being the regional language alongside your other languages like English and Afrikaans, which are, especially English, which remains official, etc. All right. You mentioned Tanzania. And Tanzania has given us probably the best example in Africa of a country that said, sure, we have a lot of languages, but we do have a language that other people can subscribe to and that we can use. And actually they went ahead and did that. So the first president of Tanzania, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, said, we already have Swahili. What's wrong with that? And in Tanzania, Swahili has now not only emerged and promoted to be the national language and official language, but it has now even got to the stage where it is putting the other languages on the endangered list, because more and more of the youth are just going straight into Swahili rather than into their other languages.
Professor Mchombo, what is the future of Africa? And I leave it up to you to answer this in whatever way you think is a good way to tackle it.
We inherited, a legacy that has all the trappings of colonialism, and certainly we can't, to pretend that, that is not to be addressed, would be to sort of really try to, try to assume that you don't have a history. Things tend to sort of be affected by your historical background. The question really is, now that we can do a critical assessment of that, all right, what are the steps that are needed to, ensure that the future is going to be reasonably different, and it's a future we can claim. We need to know our history. All right, but the history should now inform us on how do we now, shake off, that legacy, or what aspects of it can we adapt to move forward. We need to be able to have something we can offer others, not just always be in the situation of expecting others to give us things. And if we can begin to make investments in the youth, give them an understanding of where we're coming from, let them begin to sort of look forward and say, sure, we don't want that, but we want to be able to see how our own artistic, endeavors, can bring something fresh, how our own, cultural values, how our systems of knowledge can reinforce, can implement, or not implement, can complement, other systems. We're going to be in the situation where that is Zimbabwean scholar said, where, the tributaries, are enriching us just as we are enriching them. And we overlook the fact that, developed countries have actually done that routinely.